In this video, I'm going to teach you how to sew on buttons using your sewing machine. Now, a lot of people don't realise that they have this function on a sewing machine, and you may have a couple of accessories in your accessory pack that will help you sew on these buttons. So I'm going to teach you all the different ways you can do that. So here I've got a mechanical sewing machine, and if you've got a mechanical sewing machine, you may have had something like this arrive in your accessory pack. So this is a darning plate, and it sits on top of your feed dogs to prevent the fabric from moving with the feed dogs when you are stitching something like a button or doing any sort of freehand embroidery. So that's a darning plate. Now, if you don't have one of those, there's a good chance that you can take your stitch length down to 0, which is the equivalent of stopping your feed dogs from being able to move. They will just stay static and go up and down. So that is also an option if a darning plate does not exist. So we are going to be looking at sewing on buttons with a zigzag stitch. So we need to make sure that we have set it to the zigzag function, and we are looking at stitching about 3.5 mil in width. Now, the reason why I've chosen 3.5 mil is because, generally speaking, this is the distance between the buttonholes on most buttons, regardless of the size. They will always be about 3.5 mil, but it's always something you need to check in advance of sewing. So moving on to the sewing machine feet themselves. Now, you can sew on buttons using your standard zigzag foot, or you may receive a darning plate as part of your accessory kit, which is plastic and see-through, and you'll get a much better visual as to where those buttonholes are sitting in relation to your needle. Or you may end up using a foot like this. Now, this is a very common button foot, and it has a little bit of silicone at the front of it to support the button and to stop it from moving when you go to sew it. So I'm going to place this on the machine and show you how it works. So I've placed this button foot onto the sewing machine, and I've made sure that the silicone is pointing towards me. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to now place the fabric into position. And one of the things you may need to do, particularly if you've got a darning plate on, is utilise the spring on the presser foot lever to lift it up that extra bit to help navigate the fabric into position. Similarly, you're going to need to do that with your button as well. But what we want to do is get the button into position. And ideally, we want to have the holes of the button between the silicone. Okay, so before you go straight in with your foot pedal, it's really a good idea just to walk the needle in to those holes manually first, just to make sure you've got the right width. So I'm quite happy with that. That's working quite nicely. But if you find that it's a little bit tight or a little bit too big, you can always adjust the stitch width. So now that is sitting nicely, I'm going to go in with my foot pedal and do probably between 6 and 8 stitches. Finish it off, and there we go. So there we go. So I've pulled the tail threads through to the back so that I can tie those off, ready for securing. But that's how you sew a button on using a manual sewing machine. I'm going to now teach you how to do it with a computerized one where the feed dogs can be dropped. So with a computerized machine, you may find that you don't have a darning plate, and you also cannot get your stitch length below 0.2 millimeters when you're on a zigzag stitch. And that is actually very, very common. And the reason why is because you will have capacity to drop your feed dogs. So you completely disengage the feed dogs from the machine's functionality. On this machine, You can do this at the front, although it's very common to find the switch is at the back of the machine. So if I take off this free arm, you can see there's a little lever just here that allows me to disengage my feed dogs. So we can now sew the button on just as we did with the manual machine. So I'm going to place the fabric in and the button in between the silicone. I'm going to drop the presser foot and I'm going to wind it on by hand. Now it may start by doing a couple of stitches. There we go. Yeah, I'm very happy with that. So if I now do that with my presser foot, you'll see that that's now sewn on. Just like so. Now once you've finished sewing your buttons on, it's really important that you re-engage your feed dog. So you again find the lever and click it on, and you must do a full 360 turn of your balance wheel to re-engage them. And make sure that's going towards you. And now you can see that your feed dogs are working.